We should be live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to each and every one of you. I trust that all of you has had a wonderful week so far, and hopefully you'll have a wonderful rest of the week, because things are getting interesting. To say the very least, things are getting interesting, and I'm going to do my best to break down the world as it currently exists, explain to you where we are, what you can expect from the world moving forward, and what exactly is happening in Iran. How does this impact South Africa? What is about to happen in South Africa? Because yes, even though there are things happening in the wider world, there are also a lot of things happening right here at home that we need to be discussing. It is, of course, 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 9th of April. That means that anything that happens after this point, I cannot vouch for. So everything that I'm about to give you is true as of 12 o'clock, 9th of April. It's about midday here in South Africa. It's still early wee hours of the morning in Washington, as well as in China. We would be almost in the next day. Australia, you would be in the next day. So please keep that in mind as we're going through all of this information. Now, we have, and I should first just say, welcome to each and every one of you. I'm super happy that you are all here once again. And I hope that this is going to be a fruitful 2 hours, where hopefully by the end of this, you can leave here and go, okay, I understand a little bit more about what's going on in the world around me, understand a little bit more about what exactly is happening. I've been spending really the last 24 hours or so just frantically and endlessly consuming every piece of content and news that I could get my hands on, trying to make sense of the entirety of the situation. And there's a number of things that has made this a lot more difficult than you would initially think. So first, let's just quickly talk about what has happened. Earlier in the week, actually maybe even last week, President Trump started posting, this was literally during the Easter weekend, President Trump started posting some, let's just say, incredibly brazen posts over on Truth Social, where a lot of them were not presidential. Let's be very frank and honest. President Trump called the Iranians effing crazy bastards. He basically warned them that he would completely bomb them back to the Stone Age, and that we're facing civilizational collapse in Iran. He even went so far as to make a post where he said that tonight, this was on Tuesday, an entire civilization will die. And that's not what he wants, but that is ultimately what is ahead of him. This has, of course, led to an increased amount of tension around the world, because the entire world was waiting with bated breath, wanting to know just how far President Trump was actually willing to go. Now, a lot of people immediately jumped on the bandwagon and said this is unacceptable. President Trump should be removed from office. No president should ever speak this way. This is absolutely not presidential. And to that I say, boo-hoo, this is exactly how you want the president of your country to be. You want a president, because remember, the president is the commander-in-chief. The president is literally the first line of defense against anyone that might want to attack your country. And you want, specifically the enemies of your country, to be afraid of the guy that is keeping his finger on the button. You want the enemies of your country to be sort of wondering, wait, is this guy going to do it? And that's exactly what those posts were meant to be. They weren't meant for us. They weren't meant for you and me or the Western audience or even for the Americans. They were meant primarily for the Iranians. And the Iranians had to ask themselves a very serious question. Will he do it? Is he crazy enough to actually just level everything? Because he started threatening. He said, we're going to go after your power stations. We're going to go after your oil. We're going to go after your civilian infrastructure. We're effectively going to bomb you back to the Dark Ages. And they believed him. Because shortly after these threats, we found out that a ceasefire is now on the cards. And we found this out from the most neutral source, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who is the man that has been appointed by both Iran and America to be the mediator in these negotiations. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, even though Pakistan is not necessarily the most truthful actor, historically speaking, this is at least a man that would know the demands from both sides and would understand whether or not a deal could even be reached. And he informed us on Tuesday that there is light. Not necessarily that there's a lot of light, not necessarily that there's a big opportunity for peace, but there is room for it. And of course, he said that because he received the demands from both the US and from Iran. He looked at these demands and he said, okay, maybe there is some wiggle room in this. So we have a 15-point demand list from America, as well as a 10-point demand list from Iran. And I'm going to go through both of these lists very quickly. The American one is pretty much what America has demanded from Iran for 47 years. The first is a nuclear program dismantling. So they have to dismantle every single nuclear facility that they have. Also, facility shutdowns. Every single nuclear facility that Iran has to be completely decommissioned and destroyed. The stockpile removal. Iran is currently sitting on X amount of nuclear material that has already been enriched. A lot of this is actually under rubble because it's already been bombed. And so America is effectively saying, you're not allowed to go to that. If we see you even looking in that direction, it's back on. The only way we'll allow you to go there is if you're going to remove it and hand it over. Not to America, but to the international agency. It's called IAEA or something to that effect. The real name will have us here till midnight, having to go through that. But effectively, they have to hand over all of this material. The next is unrestricted IAEA access to, it's called the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's a lot of words. Basically, these are just the nuclear watchdogs of the world. And Iran has to agree to unrestricted access to the nuclear watchdog whenever they want. If they want to come in and check whether or not Iran has nuclear weapons or is working on a nuke, they can, and Iran cannot stop that. Then regional proxy restrictions. Iran has to stop funding all terrorist organizations around the Middle East and also around the world. And any funding of any terrorist organizations will be a break in this treaty. Missile program limits. So effectively, the Americans aren't telling the Iranians that you can't build missiles, but they are telling the Iranians that your missiles have to be restricted in terms of where it can reach, where it can go, how fast it can go, and how big the payloads are allowed to be. The next one is regional maritime security, and that's the one that we're going to get back to in a second, because I actually think this is the most interesting one and actually reveals something that is going on currently in Iran. Now, this one is that regional maritime security, ensuring that the Strait of Hormuz is open as well as reinforced and defended. Now, keep that one in mind because that's going to be very interesting in a second. Stopping energy facility attacks. They have to immediately stop attacking anyone in the neighborhood, anyone in the Gulf regions. There's a 30-day ceasefire on the card. So if Iran is actually willing to start negotiating these points, America is willing to adopt a 30-day ceasefire. Next, America promises to remove all sanctions on Iran should Iran accept these 15 sanctions, which would actually be incredibly good. And again, we're going to be getting to that in a second. And then civil nuclear support, providing US support for civilian electricity generation at Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant. So America is effectively telling the Iranians, even though you're not allowed to enrich uranium, we will provide you with uranium so that you can have nuclear power plants and you can provide electricity to your people. And we will actually do that. America, at least a month ago, were willing to give this to the Iranians for free for life. So the Iranians would never again have to pay for nuclear fuel, uranium or thorium. There's no thorium power plants yet, but if thorium power plants became a thing, America would almost certainly push the Iranians to move to thorium reactors rather than uranium reactors, because thorium is famously very difficult to turn into nuclear weapons because thorium itself isn't nuclear fissionable. or fissionable, but it can become if you introduce, I can't remember, there's something that you have to introduce, and then that creates the nuclear reaction. And in a bomb, that's very difficult to do. So currently, that is considered to be the safest of all nuclear power plants. But that's the 15-point plan or demand list from the Americans. On the flip side of this, Iran has their own 10-point plan. And unlike the American one, I'm not actually going to go through the Iranian 10-point plan for reasons that by now should be quite obvious to everyone. We don't actually know what Iran's 10-point plan is. The issue is that we have a 10-point plan from the Prime Minister of Pakistan. About 2 hours after that, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and a bunch of other outlets came out and said, actually, no, that isn't the 10-point plan from the Iranians. This is the 10-point plan from the Iranians. And then about 2 hours after that, we got another 10-point plan or 10-point demand list from the Iranians. And we have this constant sort of finger pointing where the Iranians are going, we're negotiating with America. And other Iranians are going, well, we're not negotiating with America. Who the hell are these people negotiating? Because that's not us. And so you have this sort of mess of someone is negotiating with the Americans, and the Americans clearly believe that someone is negotiating with them. The Pakistanis say that someone from Iran is negotiating, but the Iranian regime, at least the IRGC and the Ayatollahs, they maintain that they are negotiating with no one. That's important. Now, the 10-point plan, the one that at least where there's overlap, effectively demand that the US vacate completely the Middle East. All of their military bases have to be vacated. This is a no-go. America will never agree to this. Moreover, none of the Gulf states will ever agree to this. The Gulf states are more sort of committed to the destruction of the Iranian regime than ever before. And we now also have reports from the Gulf nations that they are in contact with Israel to basically declare a new war on the Islamic regime of Iran. So you have Muslim countries in the Gulf that wants the Islamic regime of Iran destroyed because they believe the Iranian regime is just untenable. There's no way for them to actually work with the Iranian regime. So they're not going to agree to America pulling out. America isn't going to agree to that. The next is they want full access to nuclear weapons. They want to be able to build nuclear weapons if they want. They want to be able to continue missiles and missile production. They effectively just gave a 10-point plan of all the things that America will never in a million years give them. That's the 10-point plan that's on the table. Now, the reason I don't believe that this is actually the 10-point plan or the 10-point demand list is the Prime Minister of Pakistan would not have said to America, there is a deal here if those were the 10 demands. Because those 10 demands are not demands that America will ever agree to. Those 10 things that I just mentioned to you are the very reason America is currently bombing the living crap out of Iran, or was until about 24 hours ago. So America isn't just going to walk away from this and go, well, okay, continue. That's not going to happen. So right now, we don't actually know what the Iranian position is. And that brings me to the first point of contention that I think is important here. And I believe that President Trump knows this. I do believe that there are at least two factions currently existing in Iran that aren't on the same page. So in order to understand this, you have to understand a little bit about the history of Iran and about the internal workings of Iran. So Iran's leadership structure works as follows. You have the Ayatollah and the mullahs at the top. These are the religious leaders of Iran. They're the Islamists. Right underneath them, almost on equal power, is the IRGC. They are the military wing of the Ayatollah and the mullahs. Then you have the civilian government, the Prime Minister of Iran, as well as the parliament and all the rest of it. And then under them, you have the military of Iran. Now, the IRGC answers directly to the mullahs and the Ayatollah. The military answers directly to the parliament and the Prime Minister. And there has been for years now a belief that while the IRGC and the Ayatollah are religious fanatics that will just never negotiate anything with the West, and they will actually see the destruction of Iran before they let go of any of their plans, the civilian government, which isn't actually voted for, by the way, the civilian government is installed by the Ayatollah, but that the civilian government and the military is a lot more open to negotiations. The problem is the military of Iran doesn't have the power to really stand against the IRGC, or at least that used to be true. It's also during the protests that happened in Iran almost like a month ago now. It feels like longer ago, but about a month ago, you had the protests in Iran. It was the military, not the IRGC, that in often cases would defect and join the civilians, lay down their arms. It was the military that refused to open fire on the civilians of Iran, not the IRGC. Also, it is the IRGC that has suffered the most losses throughout this entire bombing campaign. America and Israel have been targeting the IRGC, their barracks, their bases, their missile launch pads, and all the rest of it. Those have been bombed to smithereens. I'm not saying that the military hasn't suffered losses. They have as well. But in many instances, the military is still largely capable. Not necessarily at full force, but they are capable. And so my theory, and I haven't heard anyone else suggest this theory, but just looking at the demands, and specifically, remember what I told you guys, there's 1 year that makes me think that America themselves also understand this. One of the demands, the 15th demand from the Trump administration, is that Iran should ensure that the Straits of Hormuz remain open, but then they should also reinforce and defend the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this immediately, when I read this, I thought, that's an interesting demand. Like, the last thing we would want is Iran to reinforce and defend the Strait of Hormuz. It is Iran, after all, that is keeping the strait closed. By saying that you should keep it open and reinforce and defend it, you're effectively saying build defensive structures like bunkers and stuff to bomb anything that moves through the strait that you don't want moving through the strait. America wouldn't ask Iran to do this unless they were dealing with a faction within the regime that is in no way, shape, or form interested in continuing the war, or even necessarily interested in continuing their friendships with terrorist regimes around the world. So it is plausible, at least, that we currently have one of the first major splits in Iran, where the civilian government, or at least members of the civilian government, and the military believe that with the help of Israel and America, they can not only free themselves from the IRG, but completely crush the IRG, and then most likely we'll see some kind of easing of tensions between Iran and a lot of the other people in the region. But that's really just reading the 15-point plan. That one jumped out at me as just something that doesn't make sense. This would have been like in the Second World War, America sending a demand to Nazi Germany saying, we demand that you keep the English Channel open and free, and also that you reinforce your beaches, the French beaches between France and England. Like, why the hell would you want your enemy to reinforce the very point of entry that you need to attack through, right? That would just not make a lot of sense. And so fundamentally, this sort of stood out to me. Just sort of laying that out to you, I do think that there is negotiations currently underway in and between America and Iran. The problem right now is we don't know how these negotiations are going to play out. That is going to be a waiting game, right? And now we're going to get to some of the things that I think is sort of connected to this, but also things that we have to talk about in terms of what are the scenarios going forward. What can we expect here moving forward? So first, with all of this that I've just given you, all of the backstory, the 15-point plan, and everything that sort of comes with that, I want to start by focusing on President Trump and the different scenarios that we are likely to see come out of this. I'm going to start, and I need to make this super clear before we even get going. These are scenarios. I'm not predicting the future. I'm not telling you this is exactly what will happen. There's no way in geopolitics that I can do that, right? Because the thing with geopolitics is you look at the world the way that it is and you ask yourself, what is the most rational thing for rational actors to do next? The issue is that the world is almost never rational and actors are rarely rational. And so what ends up happening is you might have a perfect prediction, and it is the most rational prediction, but irrational actions will immediately change it, and then everything else changes alongside it because you are dealing with a chaotic system at best. So scenario one, what is it that Trump just achieved in Iran? Well, if everything goes well, and if the Iranians agree to, let's say, 2/3 of the 15-point plan. And I do believe that there are points on this 15-point demand list that are just completely untenable. The Iranians will never agree to this. But then I do think there's also enough room here that the Iranians could probably negotiate with the Americans and be like, hey, okay, look, we get that we are not allowed to build nuclear bombs, and we will stop that. But you can't demand that we just stop enriching uranium. We promise that we won't enrich past 40%, and that's it, right? And the Americans might be able to go, okay, fine, we'll allow this, but no more, right? We're not going to go any further than that. So let's imagine, right, in the first scenario, President Trump gets a good deal. Not a perfect deal. Perfect deals are rarely, if ever, possible. But let's imagine he gets a good deal. This is the largest victory and the biggest FU to the Democrats that President Trump could ever have achieved. Because effectively, President Trump will then, within the next 30 days, secure the Republican re-election of both the House, or the retaking of the House and the Senate. 100%. And the reason for it is the Democrats have effectively planted themselves 100% against President Trump and this war. The Democrats have screamed at the top of their lungs that President Trump must be impeached, that President Trump is a war criminal, that President Trump has gotten America back into the forever wars, and that these forever wars just cost American lives. And of course, no one actually looks at the reality. America has been able to decimate Iran, and they have lost 13 people. Now, that is incredibly sad, and any human life lost is sad, but war comes with cost. There's always cost to war. This is the first time in history that a nation has been completely decimated and the other nation lost 13 people. And not one of the people lost was actually directly attacked. It was mostly mistakes that happened, right? And so fundamentally, well, actually not one, there were a couple. I think the first 6 people that died were actually from an Iranian attack on a military base. But then everyone else that died after this was in accidents that happened with planes going down, sort of flying in each other's airspaces, and that caused a few hiccups. But 13, that's the number. 13 people died. That's insanity when you actually think about it. So President Trump, if he gets even a good deal out of this, and a good deal would look something like 8 out of 15, they accept, right? And the biggest ticket items, they go, sure, cool, we won't do this anymore. So what happens now is President Trump goes back to America and he tells the American people, we won. We won. We neutralized Iran. We neutralized the terrorist threat that Iran has posed for the last 47 years. Oil prices will plummet as a result of the lifting of sanctions because Iran will finally be able to export their oil again at market prices. And before the midterm elections, America's economy goes roaring back. The American people look at the Democrats and go, wait, you guys are traitors. While we were at war, you guys were doing everything in your power to undermine our president and our country. And our president actually fought for us. He freed the Iranian people from an evil dictatorship, and he has actually brought peace to the Middle East. That's the victory, right? And that ensures that the Republicans take the House, they take the Senate, and more importantly than that, it ensures that either J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio becomes the president after Trump, because they will ride this wave all the way through to the end. Scenario number two. Scenario number two, President Trump gets a decent deal. Not a good deal from the Iranians, but decent. Now, when I say decent, I mean that the Iranians agree on paper to the demands, but they don't actually follow through. President Trump can still flip this into a victory for himself, because what President Trump then does is he goes back to America, tells his military officers and generals, get ready. Get ready. Rearm, rebomb, remissile, everything. We have to be at maximum capacity because we are going back, but not yet. For now, we're going to wait. We're going to wait until after the midterms. The American people believe that they won. This was a victory for America. America has the opportunity to now watch what the Iranians are doing, who's making friends with Iran, who's sending weapons to Iran, what are the movements of the Iranian regime, what is the movement of all of their soldiers. They get to ascertain all of the secret sites that may still be in operation. The midterms happen. President Trump, the Republicans retake the House because everything still stands. The Americans believe that this was a victory. Shortly after the midterms, America's military is back, and now the bombing starts anew. Now they have more information. They know where the lost bases are. They know where the lost places are, the factories, and so on and so forth. And that is a decimation of Iran. But this time, America goes and basically just bombs them back to the Dark Ages. This is another way that the president can go. This is another scenario for President Trump, which assures the House and the Senate remains with President Trump, but also at the same time means that Iran will eventually be wiped off the map. Scenario number 3. This is where we get to the bad scenarios, the scenarios that none of us actually want to talk about, but we have to if we're going to be, if we're going to get a full picture. Iran doesn't agree, and the war continues. And the war will grind on. The war will grind on for months because effectively, where the Americans are now, they have taken out all of the big military targets. Iran doesn't have any more nuclear bases left. They have no more ballistic missile bases left. All of their silos have been destroyed. Most of their factories have been destroyed. There are no more military assets to bomb. What you have now are small guerrilla groups with shoulder-fired missiles, which is very difficult to bomb because they can appear and disappear in 10 minutes. They don't need an hour. They can do it in 10 minutes, quickly fire a missile, and then sort of go back into the mountains. So this becomes a very long, drawn-out bombing campaign where you just have to constantly hope that you sort of get lucky. The Iranians can utilize that to sort of create more pain and suffering for the rest of the world. And as a result of this, President Trump and the Republicans will most likely lose the midterms. The Republicans will probably keep the Senate. I don't see a world in which the Republicans lose the Senate, especially when you look at the numbers. About 93% of Republicans believe in this war and support President Trump in the war. This is according to every single poll from every single mainstream media, as well as every single polling institution in America. They all find that Republicans across the board support this war. They support this war. They support President Trump. So yes, you have Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith and all of these voices, Megyn Kelly, screaming about Trump and screaming about the war. But it's not clear to me that the Republicans have bought into it. So the Republicans will probably keep the Senate, but they will almost certainly lose the House if this war continues for much longer. Because from there, and what does this mean for us here in South Africa? If this war restarts, you have already seen the pain that South Africa has gone through. You've already experienced it. Our rand took a beating. All of those green shoots of the economy was wiped out in about 24 hours. The rand has had a small reprieve, and this morning it's already starting to weaken again because no one actually knows if this is going to get better. More importantly, oil will rocket up if this war restarts. It will rocket up because at that point, people around the world will realize, okay, this war isn't just going to end. This war is now, we're in this, right? And so oil prices will probably go to $150 a barrel. It might even go to $200 a barrel before the end of the year. This means South African fuel users, that's basically all of us, you need to get ready because South Africa is already in a pinch. This will simply mean that you'll probably pay double what you are currently paying at the pump for oil. That's not even to remove the fact that the oil reprieve that you and I were given by the government is not actually a reprieve at all. So the new head of SARS just came out and said, oh, by the way, the 3 rand petrol price relief that we've given you, yeah, we're going to tax the living crap out of you in order to get that money back. Because we've just lost a couple of billion rand from giving you fuel for cheaper. And we're going to have to make that back some other way. So SARS is already looking at ways to increase their tax collections on ordinary South Africans. So, whatever money you may have saved at the pump, you didn't save anything. SARS is still coming after that money. So you can imagine that this is going to continue to skyrocket. Prices are going to continue to skyrocket. And as you can see from this, the government is in no way, shape, or form interested in lowering the burden on the taxpayer of South Africa. The government is only interested in making more money from the taxpayer in South Africa. And so once we get to a 10 Rand increase on petrol or a 20 Rand increase on petrol, you can bet your bottom dollar the government is simply going to tell you, eat it. This is on your heads. We can't take away the last of our levies. We can't take away the taxes that we charge or the import taxes that we charge. You're just paying more now. Congratulations. Right? And this will probably crash the South African economy, but this is what happens when you have a government that needs to balance greed and personal enrichment with actually governing a country and also feeding about 30 million parasites, which, of course, the ANC is never actually going to give up on their parasites because they're the ones that keeps them in charge. So ultimately, what it boils down to for South Africa, no matter what happens after this, if there is not a peace deal on the cards, the South African economy is going to suffer. It is going to get really, really tough here, especially since the ANC continues to taunt President Trump. The ANC has bought into this. And this is, by the way, just one of my favorite things. If President Trump is able to pull off this war, right, and pull off this victory, this is really bad news for South Africa and for the rest of the world. Up until now, a lot of the countries throughout the world has played sort of chicken with President Trump. South Africa was one of the countries that started doing this first. The idea that President Trump won't do anything because no other president in America has ever done anything to South Africa. South Africa has always been able to basically serve their masters in the East and still take money and privileges from the West. For the first time ever, countries around the world has to realize or has to start contending with the fact that President Trump might not be bluffing. He didn't bluff in Venezuela. He didn't bluff in Iran. He might not be bluffing next. And what makes President Trump even scarier is he doesn't actually warn you ahead of time. In prior years, when George W. Bush wanted to go into Afghanistan, he told Afghanistan that he was coming 9 months before the invasion even started. When Barack Obama wanted to bomb the living crap out of Syria, he told Syria that he was going to bomb the living crap out of them months before they actually started bombing. No one knew that Nicolas Maduro was about to be captured. We all woke up to see that Nicolas Maduro is no longer in charge of Venezuela. We all woke up to bombs bursting in Iran and going, what the hell just happened? This is the scary part of President Trump. And the reason this is masterful lies in President Trump's view on geopolitics and how geopolitics is supposed to play out. In order to understand this, there's a couple of historical sort of truths that you have to sort of know before you even get into this. You go back to President Nixon. President Nixon did something similar to this, where he would be the madman and he sent Kissinger to be the good cop, right? When he went to the Egyptians and to the Serbians, this was the idea that I'm crazy. I'll do crazy things. You want to taste me? And Kissinger would be the one, guys, he's off. He's not. I don't know what this guy is doing. Like, please, can we make a deal? Because this guy is absolutely off. He's not. We don't know what's going to come next. President Trump is playing the exact same game. This idea that I'm going to keep you guessing. you're not going to know what is happening next. You're not going to know exactly what I want next. And that is because there's a famous saying, and I can't remember who is the geopolitical scientist that actually said this, but it is a phenomenally cool saying. War is merely diplomacy by another means. Right? I'm paraphrasing because he was far more eloquent in saying it, but I genuinely can't remember who the guy was. But he basically made a different point when it comes to war. You see, historically, the way wars have been fought in the Second World War, the First World War, the Korean War, the Japanese, the Indo-Pacific Wars, the Vietnam War, the First Gulf War, the Second Gulf War, the big push into Russia, Ukraine. All of these wars are final wars, right? So there were no negotiations between the Americans and the Allies and Nazi Germany. They didn't have negotiators reaching out to Hitler, finding out if there's a way to put an end to this war. Russia didn't send negotiators to Ukraine to see if Ukraine would adhere to their demands, nor did Ukraine answer with anyone. It was always third-party nations that would push for negotiations. But effectively, the war is treated as it's war. Now we're fighting, and we'll fight until there's nothing left. These wars are oftentimes very costly, very expensive, and they cost a lot of lives. Because effectively, you're going in with the idea that the other side must surrender completely. Now, sadly, the only way most of the time countries surrender completely is you have to make it so expensive for them to keep fighting that they just no longer want to fight. And that often means you have to be willing to lose more soldiers than what they are, right? And so these wars are sort of indicative of the last 80, 90 years. What this political scientist was ultimately saying was there's another way to fight a war. And that is to view war as another diplomatic tool rather than the end of diplomacy. Because war is merely diplomacy of another kind. Right? And you should look at war, and I believe that this is how President Trump looks at war. If you look at what happened with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, President Trump didn't just go in, capture Maduro, and then just nothing. Prior to the capture of Maduro, President Trump's administration was already in negotiations with Venezuela, and they had identified certain individuals in Venezuela that would be a lot softer to America's interference and to America in general. And so when they went in to take Maduro out, they already knew that there was a path to peace here. In the same way, when President Trump started with Iran, you'll remember that it started with negotiations. Then President Trump realized these negotiations are stalling tactics. The Iranians aren't actually negotiating in good faith. And that's when President Trump started bombing. But all throughout the bombing, with every bomb that dropped, there were negotiations. President Trump was constantly telling the Iranians, come to the table. Come talk. We're willing to make a deal. If you're willing to make a deal, we'll make a deal. This is unheard of. This didn't happen in the First World War. It didn't happen in the Second World War. It didn't happen in the Japanese Wars. It didn't happen in the Korean Wars. It didn't happen in the Vietnam Wars. In no wars in the last, I want to say 1,000+ years, have we had a war where the aggressor is telling the country that it's attacking, come negotiate. Now, what makes that masterful is you kind of have to look at it similar in business to a hostile takeover. Now, I'm not going to go through everything that a hostile takeover entails because we'll be here forever. But effectively, a hostile takeover, you buy 5 or 6% of the stocks of the company. You then dump those shares, which tanks the share price. Then you buy a bunch of those shares back at a much cheaper price. You get more access to the company, and then you'll start negotiating. You'll be like, okay, I'll dump 25% now, and I'll bankrupt your company, or you can sell your company to me at a discount. Again, there's millions of different ways that this can happen, but effectively, that's a hostile takeover. This is what President Trump does with war, which is absolutely genius. Because President Trump isn't interested in fighting forever. The fight has an objective. There's something that we want to achieve with this fight. and we'll fight until you give us what we want. And that's the thing that I believe now signals to the rest of the world that President Trump is serious. This is the thing that countries like South Africa now has to keep in mind. For President Trump, war is a diplomatic tool. And it's not a forever tool. It's not that America wants to annex and control the entire world. It's that President Trump, and if you look at the deals that President Trump consistently strikes with different countries, the deals always work out for both countries. America isn't just taking and not giving the other country anything. The Venezuelans got the deal of a lifetime. They're able to once again start selling their oil to America, which is what they were doing until 2014. And they get all of the money that they're selling the oil to America for, and America then gets to sell the refined product, which is what the original deal was, which made Venezuela one of the richest countries in South America. President Trump just gave them that deal again. He could have gone in and said, we're taking all of your oil. And what would Venezuela have done? They don't have the military to take on the Americans. But President Trump didn't do that. He cut a deal that both sides could live with. He's doing the same. You look at the 15-point plan that they're doing with Iran here. It's a deal that both sides could live and thrive with. So President Trump is using war as just another diplomatic tool. And now he's at a place where he doesn't even have to go to war. He could just threaten it. And most countries around the world are going to be like, well, do you think he will? Because he did it before. Right? And so everyone is now going to be wondering, will he actually do it again? Now, of course, you do have your people that just maintain that President Trump is absolutely out of his mind. He's a crazy person. He's a warmonger. The problem with that is you have to think logically. You have to ask yourself the logical question. If he is a warmonger, why would he consistently be looking for peaceful paths out of war? A warmonger could literally just bomb and continue to bomb and continue to bomb until there's nothing left. A warmonger wouldn't be demanding that there is negotiations and that the war stops because, well, they want to make war. Instead, consistently, President Trump is asking countries to come to the table. Let's discuss. Let's find out. How long has President, and we'll talk about this in a second, but how long has President Trump had a problem with NATO? And NATO may have just signed its own death warrant, which we'll discuss in a second. How long? And still, President Trump stays in NATO. And that's because he's not a warmonger. He's not the guy that wants to go into forever wars. But he is the guy that believes that America is the world superpower. And as a result of that, America does have the right to demand certain things from the world. If the world wants access to America and wants access to American power, there's certain things that you have to be willing to do. And if you don't want to do those, then America is more than happy to engage with you in a military conflict until you bend the knee. And I do think that a lot of countries around the world are now accepting that this is a reality that they're going to have to face. And I actually think Europe should be very afraid. I think Europe may have just signed their own annihilation. President Trump has had a problem with Europe and with NATO since 2016. Actually, long before this. You can go back to like the early or the late 90s, and you will find that President Trump is very critical of NATO, of how the Europeans just do not meet their NATO targets. And it is bad, right? Effectively, America is the one that funds and arms NATO, while all of the European countries sit around and give free crap to their citizens that the Americans are effectively paying for. If you look at the state of of Europe's military, there is no military. And even at best rearmament at 5% at the moment, it will take Europe about 25 years to be in a position to actually survive an attack by Russia without America's help at 5%. If Europe wants to get ready for war with Russia within the next 5 years, Europe would have to start spending upwards of 25% of GDP on the military because Europe has no actual military to speak of. not the kind that can actually go to war. The kind that can do a bit of parading, and when a foreign dignitary comes, they can walk with their feet funny, and maybe do a bit of goose stepping. If the Germans want to remember the glory days. But ultimately, there is no real military that Europe can call upon outside of what America offers. And this has led to Europe sort of falling into a bit of a utopian trap. The safety, the security, and the prosperity that America provided to Europe allowed the European people to believe that they are superior to the Americans, that they don't need a military. They care about peace, and they care about diplomacy and negotiations, and about their people getting free crap, and about their people sort of living great lives and being able to retire at the age of 57 and going to school for free, because they were never asked to pay for any of this. The American public paid for Europe to be safe. And Europe, because they lived behind the shield of America, was convinced that this is just what the world is. Why would anyone want to attack Europe? The problem is they really didn't think that President Trump would become the president again. Because President Trump was the first American president to go, wait, hold on. We don't give our own people free healthcare. We don't give our own people free education. Our own people can't retire at the age of 57. In America, you get rewarded based on how good you are, right? And you have to be willing to work for it. We don't do these free things. And yet we have to pay for your security so that you can hand out these free goodies to your people? No, we're done doing that. And so President Trump started putting a lot of pressure on the Europeans, saying, hey, boys, you have to stop paying your bills. Now, of course, a lot of countries in Europe said, okay, fine, we'll start paying the 2.5% and we'll eventually make it 5%. But of course, all of their plans to go to 5% is forward dated, right? We'll be at 5% in 2027. We'll be at 5% by the end of 2028. We're not going to be at 5% right now because America can still foot the bill. Now, America was still sort of happy to do this because Europe, while it's not a great military partner, and it's certainly not a great economic partner of America, Europe does have a geopolitical sort of strategic value. There are a lot of American bases or NATO bases in Europe, which America, for this war, kind of needed. What did Europe do when America asked the Europeans, give us those bases? Bases, by the way, that the Americans built and maintained. These are effectively American bases built for NATO. What did the Europeans do? Spain said, no, you do not get to use our airspace, nor do you get to use our bases. The UK said, this is not our war. Thank you very much for playing. France said, no, we don't think you can use our airspace either, nor our bases. Countries that did actually work with President Trump in America were Greece, the Poles, the Hungarians. They were willing to work with President Trump. They were willing to offer whatever they could to President Trump. When President Trump went to Europe and said, oi, boys, we don't actually get anything from the Strait of Hormuz, so for us, the strait being open or closed doesn't really matter, but you guys get a lot of your oil from the strait. You guys get a lot of your trade from the strait. So would you guys mind just coming in and securing your own ships so that your ships can actually go and you can get access to your oil? The Europeans again went, we're not our war. We don't think we should be doing it. And eventually the Europeans were like, okay, fine. We'll send a couple of ships, but we can't send them immediately because, this is all sorts of weird. President Trump just had a meeting. I'll show you guys this. So President Trump just had a meeting with Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO. The Secretary General went to the White House. He entered through a side door of the White House, and he was in the president's Oval Office for about an hour. When he came out, there were some interesting questions that the journalists asked from Mr. Rutte. And on the question, will America pull out of NATO? Rutte said, don't know. When asked whether or not it was discussed, Rudd would change the topic. When Carolyn, the press secretary, when she was asked whether or not America will pull out of NATO, she said, most likely. Most likely. This will be discussed with the Secretary General of NATO. Now, will President Trump pull out of NATO? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. I think what President Trump will instead do is a realignment of American allies. I think what President Trump will do is President Trump will say, and this is thanks to Victor David Hansen, who is a professor of geopolitics and military strategy, one of the great geopolitical minds, and he actually explained this. What President Trump will do is he will tell NATO, by the way, guys, we're just not interested in funding the bill anymore. So we're actually going to pay exactly the same as all of you, right? We're going to pay 1/26 of NATO's overall bill. We're no longer going to be the funding giant of NATO. So good luck. We're still a full member of NATO, but we're just not interested in paying this much for NATO. And instead, what America can then do is America can go to Poland. America can go to Hungary. America can go to Greece. America can go to about 6 or 7 European countries and form an alliance with those countries. A military alliance that effectively tells those countries, let's work together. America is willing to get your economies going. America is willing to invest in your countries to actually benefit you. But this will be separate from NATO. This will have nothing to do with NATO. We don't want anything with NATO countries. This is just an alliance for us. Because all America really needs from Europe is bases. They need a place from which to launch a fight should that fight break out. What does this mean for Europe? It means Europe will stand alone against Russia. That's the sad part of this. Now, there's a German general that actually warned about this about 2 weeks ago, saying that there's something weird going on in Russia. Russia appears to be arming a military that is far larger than what it needs just to take Ukraine. And we're not talking about the frontline military. Russia has anywhere from about 400 to 700,000 troops on the front line and in the reserve for the front line that is currently going. But it appears as if Russia is arming an insane amount of troops inland. And according to at least the intelligence that Europe has, by 2027, Russia will be in a position to actually attack NATO. If Russia continues to arm the way that it is, by 2027, Russia will be ready to attack a NATO ally. With NATO, well, Russia will believe that they're able to take NATO Article 5 and they'll be able to respond to it. The problem that Europe has is that if President Trump is serious about NATO and the anger that the Americans are rightfully feeling about NATO, Europe might come to President Trump when this happens and be like, hey, Russia is attacking us. You have to come help. And President Trump might be the one to say, this isn't really our war, Like, I don't know what to tell you guys, Use the basis that we've built. Good luck, boys. Not our war, not my circus, not my monkeys. And the Americans would be well within the right to say that, because even if Russia conquers the entirety of Europe, it would make no difference to America. Right? America wouldn't really lose much if the entirety of Europe becomes part of the Soviet Union Russia, or the new Soviet Union of Russia. Because from America's perspective, that's still very far away from America. And America can still defend themselves against the Russian invasion. So from America's perspective, why would they go help Europe? And Europe is in no way, shape, or form ready to actually defend against Russia. Now, that's not necessarily a done deal, and there's a whole bunch of things that you could actually look at that suggest that even then, America would probably not want to see the whole of Europe fall to Russia. And conquering the entirety of Europe is actually quite difficult. So I don't necessarily think that's what Russia would want to do, but I can see a world in which Russia says we're going to take Ukraine, and then we're probably going to take Poland, and we're probably going to take Hungary. We're probably going to try and retake most of the Eastern blocs, and that might be something that that Russia might attempt. And if America strikes a deal, a defensive alliance with Poland and Hungary and those countries, then America will go to defend them. But America will not go to defend the other European countries, which Russia would definitely keep in mind, that this is something that can happen. So I do think NATO is done. I actually don't necessarily agree with Victor David Hansen on this. I personally think NATO has outlived its usefulness. I think NATO has created far more problems than what it actually solves. This is an institution that seems to drain a lot of money from the American taxpayer, but it doesn't offer much. What's the point of having a military alliance that when you call upon that military alliance to protect trade, the military alliance goes, well, that's not what we were formed for. Sorry, we don't care. We're not doing that. What's the point then? Why are you there? So yeah, from my perspective, I do think NATO's done. And I think that's what President Trump is going to be focusing on next. I don't think we'll get any big decisions right now, though. Just to lay that out. I think the big decisions will happen probably after the midterms. The last thing President Trump needs now is to rock the boat too much before the midterms. Because, if the Democrats get, and this is something that South Africa and almost every European nation is currently looking for, they're desperately hoping that the Republicans lose the midterms and that MAGA loses the next election. Because then it's over. They can go back to just being, what they've always been. Just taking advantage of America, and the Democrats are far too globalist to care about what is happening in America. If the Republicans hold the House and the Senate, this will be a massive warning sign to China, to Russia, to Europe, to South Africa, to Africa. Every country in the world will suddenly realize, oh, crap. It's not just 2 more years. It's likely 8 more years. Because after this, Vance or Rubio comes in, and they're going to have the exact same posturing. They're going to have the exact same way of dealing with things because they've learned from Trump how to do it. So suddenly the whole world has to renegotiate with themselves. What is the relationship that we want to have with America? And if you think China's coming to save you, I have a bridge to sell you. So yeah, this is some interesting stuff. What do you guys think? We're going to be talking about some stuff happening in South Africa in a second, but I first want to get your views on this. At this point, I'm largely skeptical of this being a productive ceasefire. Iran has too many proxies they can use to carry on with their shenanigans and then have deniability. Dylan, the thing there is America already knows that these proxies act on behalf of Iran, right? So Iran can't really say, well, this was Hezbollah, because Hezbollah answers to Iran. So I guarantee you, I'm not saying that Iran won't do that. They will probably do it, but they're not going to be able to hide behind anything, right? They're going to be, it's going to be open season on the Iranians should that happen. Do you think this will lead into a world war? A lot of countries are already involved. No, I don't think it will lead into a world war. I don't think Iran is necessarily powerful enough to enact a world war. That's not saying that Iran couldn't do that, but I would be well surprised. Iran doesn't have much left, and all of the markers for what would start a world war has already happened, and it doesn't seem like the world is too interested in getting involved in a world war. So, normally what kicks off most world wars is a third party gets involved because someone loses their minds, right? And that sets off a world war. Well, Iran lost its mind from day one and started attacking all of its neighbors and civilian installations, and nothing happened, right? No one actually started a world war. So I don't think, I think the only way that a world war kicks off would be Russia or China that gets involved sort of kinetically. But neither Russia or China looks in any way, shape, or form interested in getting involved in a kinetic war with America. So I highly doubt it. I'm never say never, right? And I'm definitely not in the. I can't predict the future. It's impossible to predict the future. But I can tell you, I'm highly skeptical. Europe must never be fooled by America's deception. Trump's statements are nothing but lies and propaganda. All right, mate. EU will fall to Islam long before they fall to Russia. This is true, Albert. So much better and safer. If you think so. Like, what bothers me at the moment is I'm not entirely sure if these are just freedom fighters that is sort of pretending to be friends of Europe, or if it's actually Europeans saying this. If you're a European and you're saying take America out of NATO because we'll be safer without America in NATO, you're a moron. Just to be clear, you will be a sitting duck, and it will be your fault. It will be absolutely deserved. Russia will steamroll you, and they will have no reason not to. Because the only reason Russia has not yet acted against Europe is because of America. And if America suddenly said, well, okay, we're done, you're done. So please. It would be open season. What about the gays of Hormuz? Now, I agree with you. It's sickening that we're just focusing on all the straits and not killing gays. In Hormuz, it is sickening, right? I agree with you. That goal really, summed it up perfectly. So yeah, no, 100%. What do you think Trump will have to do to make the ANC take him seriously? Michael, I don't think President Trump can do anything to make the ANC take him seriously. The problem for the ANC is that they are so ideologically captured. They are so deep into the communist mindset that from the viewpoint of the ANC, there's no wiggle room whatsoever. The ANC cannot see a world where they have to be friends with countries like America. You listen to what the ANC leadership says about Zimbabwe, and you kind of realize, oh, we're screwed. Because according to Cyril Ramaphosa, Zimbabwe is an example for what South Africa should be. Cyril Ramaphosa actually praises ZANU-PF for what they've been able to do to Zimbabwe. I'm not entirely sure where that praise comes from. Perhaps it's how good they are at importing food after they were actually a food exporter. Perhaps it's how good they are at starving their own people. Perhaps it's how good they are at not actually making money. I don't know, like what exactly rises to the level of praise in President Trump's mind. But then again, President Ramaphosa did say that South Africa's economy is showing green shoots. So, clearly this man is perfectly okay with mediocre results at best, or even bad results, because the South African economy clearly didn't have green shoots. It was still dying, but, it was dying a bit slower. And so that was apparently some good news for everyone. And what I'm really glad about is I was right from the beginning. Every economist, every single person was talking about how the economy is doing better and there are green shoots. And I was one of the only people to say, where are these green shoots? Because if you're going to tell me that there are green shoots in the economy, I must be able to observe a change in the way that you've been running the economy up until now. Because the economy didn't just out of nowhere start doing badly. Your decisions is what is making the economy do badly. So the only way the economy can start growing is if I can see a tangible change in your decision making, which is not what I'm witnessing in South Africa. So I was one of the few people I know of that were actually from the beginning saying, where the hell are these green shoots that everyone keeps talking about? And then as soon as the war in Iran happened, you saw all of those green shoots just disappear. Which should tell you that these were never green shoots to begin with. They were headwinds, right? Or tailwinds, rather. The commodity prices were booming. That's really good for South Africa, considering we are very heavily reliant on commodities and commodity exports. The dollar was weakening, and so the rand looked on paper as if it was strengthening to the dollar, even though it really wasn't. These were tailwinds that wasn't achieved by the South African economy. It's just stuff that happened in the world that happened to help South Africa. But the problem is that as soon as those tailwinds ended, the South African economy fell off a cliff. Right? The rand just completely dropped back to its previous levels. Unemployment is on the rise. Everything is going poorly again. Where are these green shoots? They don't actually exist because they never actually existed. Here may be subject to being Maduro'd at some point. I don't think President Trump will Maduro any world leader that isn't in South America. It is very important to understand that America does view the world very differently dependent on where you are, right? So South America is America's backyard. America views South America as its countries. These are countries that should be friends with America. These are countries that should be allied with America. America doesn't want enemies in their backyard, right? And so if you're in South America and you are an enemy of America, the chances are you're going to get Maduro'd, right? Because America doesn't want you to be an enemy there. You need to be a friend. Even if you don't like America, be a friend. It's better for all of us if we just get along. If you're in Europe or if you're in Africa, America doesn't need Africa to be friends with America. And so America is probably not going to deploy special forces to come and capture, the Monroe Doctrine is a very good example of where America is at with South America. But that does not extend to Africa or to Europe. For Africa and Europe, President Trump is more than happy to just fight an economic war. Because America does have the ability to choke Africa into submission. America does have the ability to choke Europe into submission. And so it doesn't need to be kinetic. It can be economic. And eventually these countries will just have to bend the knee. And so I think when it comes to Britain, I think when it comes to Europe, we're going to see an increase in economic as well as political pressure, but not necessarily military pressure. Every 20 years or longer, projection of the world in 2030, 2050 to 2075 says China will surpass USA. First, India and USA will be the same size economy by 2060s. What do you think will be the future? So, just the Sunray. I have a severe problem with the argument that China is going to be the world superpower. And I'll explain it to you, right? Even if you are someone that actually believes this, allow me to lay it out in a way that hopefully makes a lot of sense to people. In order to be a superpower, there are a couple of things that you need to be able to do on your own. The first is you have to have food security. If you want to be a superpower, you must be able to feed your own people, because armies and people need to eat. They can't live on, sun. The next is you have to have energy security. You need to be able to produce your own energy without interference from anyone else, or you have to be able to have reliable energy imports, reliable avenues from which you can gain energy. And then third, you need an internal economy that can sustain your country in the long term. So if we go back to the Roman Empire has an incredible internal economy. It has a lot of food thanks to a lot of the work that is done by people like Julius Caesar and some very clever people in Rome that figures out how irrigation works. This allows them to get water from places where it is to places where it isn't, but where the soil is pretty good for farming and the like. So all of these allow for the Roman Empire to gain food security, to gain military security, because at that time, energy security basically just meant wood, right? You just need to have wood. And you would have to have steel and bronze and that kind of thing in order to build your weapons. And for that, you needed energy in order to turn it into weapons. That they had in abundance. And then this internal structure of an economy that is able to sustain itself. It didn't need the rest of the world. It could sustain itself, at least in terms of a wartime economy, right? So this is the three things that every country needs in order to be considered an empire that can challenge for a world superpower position. Because remember, once you become the world superpower, on your way there, there's going to be challenges. And you need to be able to survive those challenges. Scribble, thank you so much for the 70 rand donation, dude. Really appreciate you. Thank you, sir. You're far too kind. So let's look at China. And we ask the question, does China have food security? The answer is no. China does not produce enough food for its own citizens. And thanks to China's atrocious environmental policies, most of the arable land in China is poisoned beyond belief. Most of the water sources in China is poisoned to the point where it's not even fit for human contact. We're not talking human consumption, human contact, meaning that water cannot be used in order to irrigate, the rice fields, because it would turn all of the rice toxic. That's how bad things is in China. So China actually imports almost all of its food, or at least the vast majority of its food comes from other countries. So China doesn't have food security. Next up, we look at energy security. China does have coal, but it doesn't really have oil outside of what Russia gives it. And it doesn't really have a lot of access to fuel sources, because the coal in China is, one, very, very dirty, and also very difficult to extract. It's quite deep, and so it's cheaper for China to just get the coal and the oil and things from other places. This means that most of China's energy comes from other places. The problem for China is that there are roughly 3 choke points in the world. Important choke points. The first is the Strait of Hormuz. A very, very important, as we've just seen, choke point. The next is Panama Canal. Also a very important choke point. If that goes down, we've seen it in COVID, it creates a big problem in the world. And then the third, and this is the one that's most important to China, is the entrance into the China Sea. That's also a strait of its own, and there's some complications about the naming schemes there. But that strait is where all of China's imports and exports pass. All of them. If you want to shut it down, it wouldn't be that hard. You could shut it down. And once you shut it down, China's on its own. It doesn't get any fuel, doesn't get any food, doesn't have any energy. So this would mean that China would have to send their navy to try and open that strait. Or, I think it's called the Malacca Strait. Someone also said Malacca Strait. I think that's what it's called, but it's difficult to remember all of these different places. But China would have to send their navy to this strait, right? A war means no traffic, right? No one's moving anywhere. No ships are moving in and out while navies are fighting and bombing the crap out of each other. So even if China won that battle, it would take years for that battle to conclude. And by the time that battle is done, China's done, right? China has no more, because China currently has a very large oil reserve, but the oil reserve will last China maybe on rations about a year. Then China is out of oil, right? Without oil, China's navy just dies, right? So ultimately, China's biggest problem lies in the fact that it produces nothing of its own that it requires in order to become a world superpower. Because as soon as it becomes a large enough threat, the Americans can shut China down with a couple of navy boats. And China will be a sitting duck as a result of it. So China, the idea that China is a superpower, my problem with that is, if you just look at, and let's look at the final option here, the internal economy. China's economy, their commercial economy, so internal commerce, sits at just over 40%. That's the lowest in the world. Even third world countries have a higher internal consumption than China. South Africa's is over 60%. This means that even if the rest of the world didn't trade with South Africa, roughly 60% of our GDP is made right here, with people buying and selling from one another. Compare that to China, it's about just over 40%. This means that all of the power that China has is borrowed power. It's power that belongs to other countries that those countries have willingly given to China. But if those countries stopped, if all of those countries suddenly said, we're no longer going to buy stuff from you, we'll make it ourselves, China collapses. Because for the last 7 years, that CCP has been trying desperately to boost internal consumption, and it just fails every single time. China doesn't actually have, no matter what they do, the people of China aren't buying anything. They're just not spending. They're not consumers. And so this is really hurting the Chinese economy. You have the official statement now from the CCP warning that unless they can get consumption, internal consumption up to around 60%, China cannot continue to do the things that it's doing. That's from the CCP themselves, admitting that this is a serious problem. Because right now, China may look like a very powerful country, but it is effectively a slave of the West. It produces the cheap stuff that the West likes to use. But it doesn't own those things. And it can't support itself. This is why you're seeing massive issues in China with production costs, where producers are now having to produce at a loss just to try and convince their own people to buy the stuff that they're making, because the people don't want to buy it at market price. All of those production houses and all of those factories were set up to sell to America. And since America is no longer buying, those places are struggling to find anything of value, right? No one wants to buy their crap. And so ultimately, China to me isn't a serious problem. The country that I would be far more wary of is India. Because unlike China, India is a massive country, and India has embraced capitalism. India is the most capitalistic nation on earth. And they don't care. They don't have much of a workers' rights movement in India. They're just willing to go. Right? And so I would actually say that India is most likely to be the next great superpower of the world. Now, India has its own problems in that regard, that is going to make it very difficult for India to actually be the world superpower. And one of it is just its location. Location-wise, India is surrounded by enemies. And that makes it very difficult, because being surrounded by enemies means that if you do get to the point of being a superpower, you're going to be challenged consistently by your enemies for control. America doesn't have this problem, right? America sits very far away from the rest of the world. The countries to its south has no ability to attack it. The country to its north don't even know what a woman is. So fundamentally, from America's perspective, they're sitting pretty. They don't have to worry about much. And so it's always been easy for America to remain the world superpower. And you can see that President Trump understands that if America wants to remain the world's superpower, America has to reinvent itself. President Trump, in many ways, I would actually put in line with sort of like Marcus Aurelius, but maybe we should even go back to Julius Caesar, right? I would actually say that Julius Caesar is probably the best example. I would say President Trump is very much like a Julius Caesar. This is the emperor or the Caesar, the Kaiser, that remakes Rome and sort of puts Rome on a trajectory that allows Rome to survive long past its actual expiration date. Prior to Julius Caesar becoming the de facto king of Rome, Rome is busy deteriorating and it's on the verge of collapse. Julius Caesar takes over and he makes a number of sweeping reforms, which actually allows the Roman Empire to continue for a lot longer than what it should have been. And I think President Trump is similar in that, where President Trump is coming in and President Trump is saying, we need to get back to making stuff, right? We have to produce, we have to get our economy back, because the debt that America currently has is only a problem if the economy isn't growing. But if the American economy continues to grow at 5-6% per year, $40 trillion in debt has no impact. It doesn't matter, right? And so I think that's what President Trump is trying to do. He's trying to reinvigorate the American empire, as it were. And if he is successful, America is probably going to remain the world superpower for at least the next 50 to 100 years. If President Trump isn't successful, for whatever reason, it can always happen. I do actually think that within the next 50 years, India will be the world superpower. I don't think it will be China. Someone asked here, what do I think about other Asian countries? I don't see any avenue, because all of the problems that China faces, all of the other Asian countries faces as well, right? Asia is a wonderfully beautiful place, and the people in Asia are absolutely lovely, but their region sucks. It's just a sucky area of the world. It's beautiful, but it's not really conducive to a world superpower. But you can already see how India, Japan, South Korea, even Vietnam to some extent, as well as Taiwan, how they're sort of attaching themselves to America and going back to America, because they can be regional powers with the help of America. And I think that's kind of what they're aiming for. But if de-dollarization of the world happens, America is in trouble. I say this because crypto is a sign of markets looking away from dollars. Gold and other metals are always in contention. Justice Sunray, not really. So there's something very interesting that's happening in America. The entire world, Europe, South Africa, everyone is looking into a central bank digital currency, right? All of them are looking into it, except America. America is actually looking into a stable coin. Why? Why is America looking into a stable coin when the whole world is looking into central bank digital currencies? Well, that's because America, and President Trump is actually one of the first people to have identified this. Okay, this is part of a much bigger discussion. This is much bigger. Okay. I'm gonna say this. A lot of you are immediately gonna go, no, but then it'll actually make sense. The dollar becoming the world reserve currency was the slow poison that will ultimately kill America. Why do I say this? The 35 to 40 trillion US dollars debt isn't actually America's debt. This is a very big mistake that people make economically. The debt doesn't belong to America. It's the world's debt. The only reason America is able to print as much money as it is because the rest of the world buys the money, right? And America has to print money because the rest of the world consistently wants to buy that money. The problem there is that once the bill comes due, it's the American public that will pay the majority of the bill, even though they are not the ones who made the majority of the debt. Right? That's the big issue. And so from America, from President Trump, and actually, if you don't believe me on this, you can go read Scott Bessent's paper that he wrote. He wrote a paper about 8 or 9 years ago where he actually highlights this. For America to survive, the world has to go off the dollar. It has to happen. America can no longer be the world's reserve currency because times have changed. The problem is that the rest of the world, thanks to the sharing of debt, has gone crazy. Because everyone is now spending as much money as they can, and they just believe that everyone else will pay their bills, right? So every country just comes up with a new bond, sells the bond to some other country, and boom, bam, there you go. I don't have debt problems, right? Everyone else is owning my bonds. Of course, this costs your own people a lot of money in interest, and so your country keeps getting deeper and deeper into debt. But because the money is owed by other people, you sort of feel like it's okay. So America is going the stable coin route, and I believe that this is actually why they're doing it. America is going to tell the rest of the world, look, boys, we're no longer going to give you dollars to buy and sell with. Instead, we're going to give you a stable coin, the dollar stable coin. It's completely controlled and operated by the market. You can buy it and sell it on the free market. And that currency you can use to buy and trade with as many countries as you want. That currency is open to everyone. Anyone can own it. Anyone can sell it. Go ahead. Do your thing. America will get a small cut of every single payment that is made. The world will be happy because America is the only country with the actual infrastructure to run such a stable coin. And America will effectively pay off all of its debt by using the rest of the world on this stable coin, and the currency, the money that they make America will then allow America to repay the debt that they currently have, right? So ultimately, for America, de-dollarization is actually a good thing, but it has to happen on America's terms. So where your scenario would come in here is if the rest of the world just suddenly decided, we're going to stop using the dollar. That would be really bad for America because America currently relies on the rest of the world using the dollar. So that would be really bad. The good thing for America here is that no country on earth is in the position to stop using the dollar. You have small countries that can sign small trade deals with one another in their own currencies, but the vast majority of trade has to happen in US dollars. And I'll explain to you why. If I want to buy sushi from China, right? I'm South Africa and China is China. And I go to China and I say, hey, I want to buy sushi. China says, okay, no problem. Here is our yen. And South Africa says, here is our rands. We want 10 billion rands worth of sushi. China immediately goes, wait, what the hell are we going to do with 10 billion rands worth of sushi? Or with 10 billion rand? We can't use those rands anywhere else. No other country is going to use those rands. So we're going to be stuck with 10 billion rand on our balance sheet that we can only give back to you. Right? So we have to hope that you have things that we want to buy that is worth 10 billion rand because we can't use it anywhere else. And then the same deal has to happen with every other country in the world. This is where the reserve currency of the dollar became such an important aspect because everyone wants dollars because everyone is trading and buying in dollars, right? And so it doesn't matter if a small, insignificant country like South Africa wants to buy my sushi because I'll just use the dollars that they just gave me for the sushi to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. But I can't use your rands to buy oil from Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is going to go, what the hell are we going to do with rands? We don't want the rands. We're not buying anything from South Africa. So why would we need their currency? And so the world needs some kind of legitimate single currency with which it can trade. And this is where America is coming up with the stable coin as the replacement of the world currency. That way, this is a currency that they can increase, decrease, burn if they want to, as much as they want. They can control how much of it is in the world, and everyone can just sort of do their thing, and it has no real impact on America and the American economy. The problem is that even if you had the BRICS nations trying to come up with their own way of trading, there's a big issue with exchange. You need an exchange that can actually handle the amount of money that is flowing through the world every single day. The last time I checked, it's something like 1 point something trillion dollars, I think, per second or per hour that moves through the New York exchange, the Forex exchange. This is where countries are exchanging their currency for dollars and the dollars for their currency back and forth, right? Because there's always money moving. The only country on earth that has the infrastructure to handle that level of payment is America. No other country is even close. And in order to build that, it would take at least 10 years to get an exchange like that going. Because you need the infrastructure, you need the actual pipelines and data centers to handle this. So this will take, even in China, about 10 years for them to be able to set this up. So you're still going to have, at least for 10 years, this dollar as being the reserve currency. And by that time, America will already have their stablecoin. So it's sort of like it's a race against time. And none of what I just told you comes from myself. I'm not an expert in foreign exchanges. This actually comes from Jim Rickards, who is an expert in money supplies and supply chains of money. So if you read his book, he actually explains this in a lot of detail, why this cannot really happen. He was one of the first people to say that BRICS will fall apart. And the very reasons he gave was that none of these BRIC countries are actually aligned from a military standpoint. And so BRICS was never going to be a challenge for the American system, the same way that the BRICS currency was never going to be a challenge for the Americans. Now, the difference between China and USA is that China sees the world through profit and loss vision. I respect USA for the moral stance, but China is going to benefit loads because of the manufacturing. Maybe just, but I think that is changing in America as well. I do think so. Which in turn create a different black economy where yuan is seen as a credible currency. Everything Iran needs can be supplied by Pakistan right through China. No matter how much Trump says Iran will remain, and they have tons of oil, the fact is that US can't control that now. The Western countries will not accept it, but Iran will trade in yuan. I don't think so. I think we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I actually think there's going to be some interesting developments. But I see a world where the Iranian regime does crumble. Rotting in your holy river, what would you do to others? We just spent $400 million to rescue one pilot. The country doesn't have the mindset to be a superpower. Just look at how they treat their holy river, for one. For two, check out the poop festival. No one that isn't from there is going. But as okay, I get what you mean. And I do think that you might be right. India's mindset has never really been aimed at being a superpower. So it is possible that India, purely for a lack of trying, will probably never become the superpower of the world. Right? I can respect that. All right. Let's get to the final story for today, and then I'll jump over to you guys and we can have a discussion about whatever you guys want. I foresee big problems in South Africa before 2029. So 2029 is the next national elections here in South Africa. And a lot of people have said that the era of single party rule is over in South Africa, that coalition governments is the future of South Africa. And they're absolutely correct. But there are some things that we have to come to a realization on, and that we have to accept. The first of these is that the future coalitions of South Africa will not be DAEFF. That's not what's going to happen here. In order to understand this, you have to understand the inner workings of the ANC. Cyril Ramaphosa was a Hail Mary for the ANC. The ANC, after Jacob Zuma, needed someone that could unite the party and keep the factions together, because the ANC was starting to split. Cyril Ramaphosa was that guy. He was selected because Cyril Ramaphosa is a more pragmatic guy. He is firmly a communist, but he is also willing to move slowly. He's not a rapid economic transformational kind of guy. He's not a massive revolutionary. He's more of the kind of guy, slow and steady, will eventually get there kind of guy. But also, he's a guy that can make alliances and he can sort of get everyone into a tent. And this is where you saw Cyril Ramaphosa become the president of the ANC. Paul Mashatile became the deputy president. Because Paul Mashatile represents the other side. Cyril Ramaphosa is sort of the old guard, the constitutionalists of South Africa. We've already discussed how fake that is as a word. But nevertheless, they are the constitutionalists. They're the ones who sort of, in a legal, non-legal way, get to communism. Paul Mashatile represents very much this, what you see on your screen right now. Panyaza Lesufi just made a deal with the EFF, and he's about to do it with the MK as well, to form a coalition where for the first time in the ANC's history, they're giving away a very important portfolio. Finance position. The EFF just got their hands on Gauteng's financial positions. This means that the EFF effectively has full control over all of the finances in Gauteng. Now, Panyaza Lesufi was warned by Humbalula not to do this. He was summoned to Luthuli House and told straight up, you will not do this. He said, I don't care, I'll do it. And he signed the deal. I believe that this is a test case. Everything is going to come to a head by the end of this year, early next year. When the local government elections conclude, one of two things will happen. Two major scenarios. The first, the ANC doesn't lose a lot of support. They sort of grow in some of their home states, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Eastern Cape, and they lose some support in the metros, some support in the sort of the greater South Africa, but ultimately it sort of comes at a wash. If that happens, the ANC may actually, Mbalula's faction, this would be Cyril Ramaphosa's faction, they actually see an avenue and they can make an argument to the broader ANC that we need another term of a Cyril Ramaphosa, and this is where Patrice Motsepe becomes the next nomination, right? Because Patrice Motsepe would be very much like Cyril Ramaphosa. Don't expect him to make major changes. Don't expect him to save the country. Patrice Motsepe would just be another Cyril Ramaphosa for 4 or 8 more years. There is no evidence that that is what's going to happen in the midterms. Well, I say midterms. In the local government elections. Instead, currently as things stand, the ANC looks to take one of the biggest beatings that they have ever received in the local government elections. Across the board, it looks like the ANC is about to get their bottoms handed to them and spanked. I mean, we're talking for the first time ever about the ANC actually losing Johannesburg to the DA. Right? There's a reasonable opportunity that the DA actually beats the ANC in Pretoria enough that they can actually take control without the ANC breathing down their necks. The ANC is down everywhere. If that happens, Paul Mashatile's faction can now go to the broader ANC and be like, see what you've done. By electing this man, you have destroyed this party. Our people want revolution. Our people demand revolution. The second that happens, Paul Mashatile will come to power, and that's literally my prediction. Paul Mashatile will be elected as the next president of the ANC. Paul Mashatile will immediately disband and dissolve the GNU, and he will form a new GNU for which this, Panyaza Lesufi's new coalition, is the blueprint. It'll be the ANC, the EFF, and the MK. And together, Paul Mashatile and his friends will make themselves incredibly rich. You can expect to see NHI being pushed through. If they have to change the constitution, they will have the numbers to actually change the constitution. You can expect them to to nationalize the Reserve Bank. You can expect them to nationalize the universities, nationalize the farms. They'll basically go ahead and they will bring about the Zimbabwean revolution. Because the idea is we bring the country to its knees, right? We destroy the economy, and then we rebuild the economy in our image. Because this now gives us the power to effectively, Zimbabwe is now playing around with actually removing presidential elections. And instead, what will happen is the people will no longer vote for the president, but the parliament will elect a president. That's now a new thing. So Zimbabwe is effectively giving up on democracy. Moreover, if you actually look, South Africa, less than 50% of all people in South Africa support democracy. So the majority of South Africans no longer care about democracy. So the ANC actually is in a very good position to just suspend democracy altogether. And I believe that you're going to see that because the ANC is getting desperate. This will be sort of their last play to hold on to power and ultimately to solidify power. And what they will tell the EFF is, look, if you guys are in government with us when we finally suspend elections, you will be in government forever. And we can have rotations of presidents. So for 4 years, I will be president. Then for 8 years, I will be president. Then for 8 years, Malema will be president. Then for 8 years, this guy will be president. So we'll all share power, and this will be super fun, right? Reinhard, how are you doing, sir? Ultimately, I believe that this is going to happen because, as I've discussed with you guys before, the ANC wants two things. The first is they want the Afrikaner and the white person here in South Africa to pay. They want vengeance for what was done, according to them, at least. And secondly, they want control. They want communism here in South Africa. This is their dream. This is their hope, because communism means they will be very, very, very rich. Their people will be poor. Their people will be starving, but they don't care. This is not important as far as they're concerned. They will be rich. And ultimately, that's the only thing that matters to them. So I genuinely believe that this is just the future. This is what's going to happen. I think Mashatile is the next president of the ANC. And when that happens, there are severe problems. I actually think that even if that doesn't happen, there are severe problems for Afrikaners anyways. If you guys have seen the newly proposed history curriculum, it is insane. We'll talk about that tomorrow in tomorrow's podcast, because that's a whole different discussion and topic. But yeah, there's some interesting erasures that's going to happen. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Tomorrow. All right, what did I miss? How do we get them out of power? Is voting them out the only way? Can the courts do anything? Peterson, how are you doing, sir? No, the courts are as captured. So I don't believe the courts will do anything of value here. In my estimation, the only way the ANC is ever going to be removed from power is through some kind of civil war. The people in this country that care about freedom, that care about capitalism, that care about not being controlled by communist filth terrorists, will ultimately just have to rise up. And I believe that's exactly what will happen. So I'm not worried. I do believe that the good and decent people of South Africa will win in the end. But I don't believe that that's going to happen without some kind of civil war. I just don't see it. I don't see these guys letting go of power anytime soon. Who do you think has a better relationship with the African countries today? Is it USA or China, when you take in that there is a mix of democracies and military juntas? And what would you predict future? Just the Sunray. It's always very difficult to answer, right? Because I think it's very much split. I think there's some countries who seem to have a very good relationship with America. But then there's also some countries who seem to hate America and instead love China, right? So it's a bit of a mixed bag. You look at countries like Kenya, you look at a number of the sort of Central African countries, they're striking giant business deals with America, and they seem to be doing very well as a result of that. So I think when it comes down to Africa, China and America is probably going to have a handshake deal. It's likely going to be the kind of deal where they go, look, as long as you're not anti-American, you can be pro-China. Right? Like, we don't care, because I ultimately don't think that America. I don't think America is going to go to war or spill American blood in order to fight for Africa. I think America would be far more interested in just doing business with Africa. I think that's the big mistake that the ANC is currently making as well. The ANC seems to be pushing America into this corner where the ANC is saying, unless you go to war with us, we will never change. And we're going to continue to undermine you no matter what you do, no matter what you say. So, yeah, I'm not sure. It's really difficult because China also, when China makes a deal with you, it's almost never a good deal, right? And a lot of countries have paid the price for Chinese deals. So I'm not sure. It's very, very difficult. Do you think the inclusion of African Union and BRICS shifts the power away from G7 countries? I do not. No. The G7, but I also think the G7 countries are mostly a joke, right? I think BRICS is a non-starter. I'm not worried about BRICS because ultimately the entirety of BRICS is built on China. India has also already proven that they're not bought into the BRICS idea, because while all of the BRICS nations are anti-Israel, India goes to Israel and Modi calls Netanyahu a great friend, right? So India has already proven that they're not bought into this anti-Western idea. India is perfectly happy to just be friends with everyone. So I think mostly BRICS is just, I think BRICS is going to die. I don't think BRICS will survive. Mainly because it's a doomed coalition. It's a coalition between broken countries trying to be strong together, which ultimately will not work. Unless BRICS can... Look, there's a world in which the BRICS countries reform, and suddenly you get a powerful South Africa, you get a powerful Russia, you get a powerful China, and then you have a different story, right? Then you have a very different story, because then BRICS can actually be a world superpower, or at least a player on the world stage. But as it stands right now, I'm doubtful that I'm not worried about BRICS. Let's put it that way. That's pretty sad, but not surprising. True. If you add the 2024 election results for the ANC, the MK and EFF collectively, it's around 62%, roughly the same as the ANC result in 1994. Point being, the majority of the country want its destruction. But there is one good thing about that, the determining. Something that I mentioned also in my video when I highlighted this, and that is that if you look at the amount of South Africans who did not vote in the last election, it's also much higher. It's nearly 50% of all eligible voters in South Africa did not vote. Which suggests that there is a world in which, if people actually thought the ANC could lose, you may actually see a lot of those people go back to the polls and actually vote, which could then mean that the ANC gets a lesson, right? Justice Sunray, I am South African, yes. I was born and raised here in South Africa. I love this country, which is what breaks my heart about the decisions that my country continuously takes. So please ask away. But the youth are also becoming more radical, so I don't know. I think the youth is becoming more desperate, and desperation almost always leads to radicalization. But in the South African context, we have to understand that the South African people in general isn't really a very radical people. Wait. Like we don't really have massive. Yeah, but the thing is, the communist mindset is a radical mindset. You're right, but you don't actually see the radical movements that would be required from a people to enact it. Instead, what you see far more often is that the South African people will march and strike because of service delivery, and they'll be angry, and maybe they'll burn a couple of buildings and so on and so forth. But it's very rare that you see them going out and just killing thousands of people, or burning down an entire city. This is very rare, which actually is surprising, because considering the state of South Africa, you would expect to see that more often, but you don't. And that gives me hope that the radical voices within the political sphere of South Africa are fairly isolated or insulated from the broader conversation. So, broadly speaking, what most young people in South Africa simply want is the opportunity to work and earn money. Right now, they believe that communism might be the way for them to actually do that. But if someone else came to power and suddenly, that person started making, good decisions, and the economy started growing, they'd very quickly abandon the communist idea and just sort of follow the new capitalist idea. But that's just my opinion on it. I'm not saying that that's what will happen. Um, so yeah. In India, our history taught in school had lessons of Mahatma Gandhi being hated in South Africa because of that train segregation incident, and Gandhi, in his later autobiography, explains his regrets. Justice Unray, so I don't really know. I know that the ANC hated Mahatma Gandhi because of that, yes. But I don't know how people feel about him now. You have to understand that the vast majority of South Africans are not very well educated, right? And so I think if you asked 1,000 South Africans whether or not they knew who Mahatma Gandhi was, I think you'd get about 900 of them that just go, don't know who that is. And that's by design. The ANC ensured that the majority of South Africans, white and black, would be very poorly educated. That's why you're looking at a bunch of the white kids these days, and they're super far to the left. They're super communist in their ideology, because that's what the ANC invented, right? The ANC needed these young people that sort of buy into the communist mindset from the beginning. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about what the South African public really thinks about Mahatma Gandhi. Most of them don't even know who he is. I think BRICS having to police their own shipping lanes if the USA stopped projecting power to maintain order over the oceans. The G7 and the EU is mostly coasting off US naval power. So, Inheritor, you're absolutely correct. And that is definitely another area of discussion that most people aren't even willing to discuss. And that is that world or global trade doesn't just happen. Global trade requires a global navy. And the only country right now in the world that has the ability to police the naval ways of the world is America. But you're also seeing that America is no longer really interested in patrolling the international waters. This is another reason why I think America is desperately trying to get rid of the dollar as a global trade currency, because it forces them to do things that they really don't want to do, you know? And I have to give a very big shout out here to Anonymous for the donation of 200 Rand over on Stub. I am so sorry that if you actually have a name, right, that you just didn't want to put in here, thank you. I truly appreciate the donation. If not, and the program sort of screwed up and just put you through as anonymous, please tell me if it's you so that I can thank you personally for the 200 Rand, but keep up the good work. Thank you so much, sir. I truly appreciate that. Stub donations are always interesting. So thank you for that. In television of Gandhi's statue being attacked in Africa because of that train incident, what do you think people think about today? I ask this because there is a large Indian diaspora. So in South Africa, the problem isn't really with Indians. Most South Africans don't mind Indians. There's a big issue with Pakistanis and Muslims in South Africa. But Indians per se isn't really that big of a deal. Even, to be fair, even most Muslims in South Africa, most South Africans don't have a problem with. Here and there, you do get it, yes, because there are some issues within the Muslim community, even here in South Africa. But for the most part, I would argue that the race issues of South Africa is largely between white and black, and very largely comes from the black elite. That's not to say that there aren't white people who are super racist. Of course there are, right? Racism is always going to exist. You're never going to get to a place where the entire world is just not racist. People are always going to be racist. So that's going to exist, white or black, but white people currently don't have political power, right? And even if white people had political power, I will just tell you this as anecdotal, but the amount of people that I meet in my day-to-day life that is racist, few and far between. Like you can go weeks before you actually run into someone that is just a full-fledged racist. And oftentimes when you speak to someone, they might say something that sounds a little bit racist. So the other day I was speaking to a guy, and he literally told me, I'm sick and tired of black people. And we started talking, and I sort of prodded, asked questions. And very quickly you realize he's not sick and tired of black people in general. He's sick and tired of the government, right? He's sick and tired of Cyril Ramaphosa. He's sick and tired of Paul Mashatile. He's sick and tired of Mbulula and the money that they continuously steal, the pressure that they continue to put him, the corruption and the scandals. He's sick and tired of Julius Malema singing songs about killing us. But he doesn't hate black people, right? Black people he likes. He has no problem with black people in general. His problem is with the leadership. So I do think that overwhelmingly, when you look at the majority of black people and the majority of white people, there is no hatred between these groups. They don't want to kill each other. They don't want to get rid of each other. They're happy to share a country. The issue comes in on the fringes. There is at least 10% of black people in South Africa that has a very deep revolutionary bent to them, right? And that hates white people with a passion and would probably like to kill white people. They should be the 10% that supports the EFF and a significant portion of the ANC as well. People who are singing songs like Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer. And that group exists. The problem is that you're talking about 10% of people in a nation of about 60 million. That's 6 million people. That's a significant number of people. If we apply the same to the white population, it comes out to about 400,000 super racists, right? But that's still not millions. And that's really the big issue. So it is a problem, and it can be a problem, but I don't think, at least right now, I don't necessarily think that is the big problem. But I could be wrong, right? I think the biggest problem with racism in South Africa is elites that hate white people, not really, not the people. Uh, so I actually, my hope, my dream is that eventually you get black and white and Indian and colored coming together around shared conservative values and effectively kicking out all these revolutionaries. So that's something that I really hope to see. Um, the Barbary Wars are funny. A lot of lefties talk as though white people are responsible for slavery. Barbary states relied on slavery and raiding the Mediterranean coasts. Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. Slavery was most definitely not an invention of white people. Slavery was an invention of humans. You go back as far as you want, like literally go back thousands of years, and you find slavery. It's one of the oldest forms of commerce, slavery. Before we were buying and selling anything else, we were buying and selling humans. So slavery has happened, and it has existed in every single society, every single culture, every single people. There is just no other way. The current problem in our world, the thing that currently exists in our world is there is an infantilization that happens among elite leftist whites to blacks that is unfortunate, but also very cruel and evil. The infantilization that currently happens, and you'll sort of see it when you listen to people who teach things like African studies or African history. uh, there's this whitewashing of African history as if Africans were just absolutely peaceful and beautiful, nature loving hippies, and that it was the white man who brought war and conquest and suffering. It was the white man that caused all of these problems. Black people were actually super happy and super advanced, right? If you go to America, you will hear things like actually all of the things that white people invented were actually invented by black people, and white people just stole it from them. I even saw an African history professor in America claiming that Alexander Bell didn't invent the telephone, but instead it was some black slave that invented the telephone. Of course, this is just untrue, and we have the actual evidence that shows that this isn't true, but it's all part of the infantilization of black people. And one of the big problems that black people run into, and this is, maybe we can have this conversation, because one of the big problems that we face. So South Africa, the ANC just greenlit a change to the history curriculum in South Africa, where the Afrikaner history is being completely erased. No longer will kids in school learn about 1652 and Jan van Riebeeck's arrival in South Africa. They will not learn about the Anglo-Boer War or about the Voortrekkers. They will not learn about the history of apartheid from the perspective of the Afrikaner government. Instead, the entire history from grade 4 to grade 12 will be what they call African centered. So, from an African perspective, we'll follow the history. This also means that whilst they will no longer teach Jan van Riebeeck or the Anglo-Boer War, they will very much focus on the perceived evils of the white people in Africa. Right? So this will happen. This is from next year. This is what your kids will now be taught. They are also removing, funnily enough, they are removing for grade 12s learning about communism and the fall of communism. They will no longer teach the rise of capitalism in America. All of this will be replaced with African history and the way that Africans do things. Now, there's a couple of problems with this, and one of the big ones is that we don't actually know the history of Africa. You see, Africa isn't unique in this because there's a number of other tribes for which we have a similar problem. Viking history starts pretty much at the invasion of Britain. We don't know anything before that. We don't know what the Vikings did or didn't do because the Vikings famously didn't really write stuff down. In the same way that we know very little about the Brits before the Roman invasions and before Rome captured Britain. And again, the reason for it is they didn't really write stuff down. We don't know much about the Saxon barbarians because again, they didn't write stuff down. These were tribes, and yes, they were, to some extent, they had cultures, but their cultures had not yet advanced to the point where they were actually writing down their histories. And so what oftentimes happens is we can look at when they, for the first time, encounter kingdoms that are writing down their histories, and then we can look at what those kingdoms write about them, and we can sort of, we can work back from there and say, okay, well, they were like this in this period, so we think maybe they were kind of like this also from that period. But we don't know. So when you go to Viking history, it really starts with the invasions of England. And from there, we kind of have the Viking story. And as Christianity eventually conquers the Vikings, that's the history that we have for them. In a similar vein, we know very little about Africa because African tribes don't really write down their history. We have no written accounts really of African history before Europeans encounter the African tribes. And then the Europeans are the ones that write about the African tribes. So what ends up happening, and you see it sort of in the way that, do you want to know what is going to happen with these studies, with this new curriculum? What happened the day after Ramaphosa became the president of South Africa? Speak easy, 100% true. I agree with you 100%. Christ is the only light of this world. Truth. But what happened the day after President Cyril Ramaphosa becomes president of South Africa? The history is completely rewritten. Suddenly, state capture is a thing that happened to the ANC, not a thing that the ANC did. Suddenly, Cyril Ramaphosa wasn't the deputy president of South Africa during the era of state capture. No, he was just this unthinkable thing that happened to South Africa. You see, the new curriculum with the African centrism or centralization of the curriculum is effectively the ANC's ability or attempt to rewrite the history of South Africa. Because there is no actual written history of Africa. And so what ends up happening is it's a lot of guesswork. It's a lot of saying, well, this is what happened there. And then people go, wait, how can you say that? Well, word of mouth. It's like, well, we have contesting stories. No. This is the truth. Because that's the whole of African history. There is no African history. And this is sad. Look, this is super sad. And we wish we could change that. The areas where we have a little bit of history is like the Kingdom of Zimbabwe and the Kingdom of Mali, where we have some written sources, but not much. Right? So even there, we can't really do an in-depth study of the Kingdom of Mali or the Kingdom of Zimbabwe because we just don't know. So the idea that we're going to focus on that, I guarantee you that this is another opportunity for the ANC to do two things. The first is erase the Afrikaners' history in South Africa. So your kids will just no longer get anything. Right? Your kids will just no longer get anything. Your kids will not know about their own history unless you teach them. Your kids will not know about where they come from, their ancestors, unless you teach them. Um, but more importantly, this is an opportunity for the ANC to indoctrinate the young people of South Africa into believing that everything that has ever been bad in this world is the result of white people. Everything, without fail. So yeah, I personally think I think this is problematic, to say the least. CR, how you doing? We all know about the Bantu expansion. All the people groups came down from Central Africa. So no matter what people say, black people are also colonizers, just saying. Yeah, but, they're going to be teaching it not like that. The only thing you are taught about the Boer War is that it happened between the Brits and the Boers, and weirdly about the Griqua people and the persecution of them. I hear good things about cheap two-wheeler Indian automobiles doing good business in Africa in countries like Nigeria and others. But why couldn't South Africa create alternative company to supply? Just the Sunray, because we have a government that kills all business. It's what it does. It's what they always do. Even till today, there is still slavery going on. Look at Sudan, Libya, Afghanistan recently legalized slavery, and that is messed up. Ivan, absolutely agree with you, man. That's what I'm saying. They will do that. Yeah. So I actually think we're going to get kids are going to get so indoctrinated. It's going to be insane. But okay, ladies and gentlemen, is there anything final that you guys wanted to ask me before I take off? Because I need to go bake banana bread. I have 4 bananas downstairs that's about to go off. So I decided I'll bake banana bread for the first time ever with raw flour. I've never done it. I don't know how that works, but I'm going to try. Raw flour works super weird, so not entirely sure if this will work out. The Kangs didn't record their history. Are you talking about what's his name? Are you talking about the Mongolians? My wife bakes a great banana bread, hey? The Good Shepherd. Well, the thing here is, so I've never baked banana bread, but I'm sure I can swing it. The big problem is, so I don't use normal flour that you buy in any shop. The flour that I use is direct from the wheat that I then grind, and I use that flour then to bake with. So it includes the germ, the oils, the bran, everything, right? So it's raw flour or freshly mulled flour, rather. And you have to freeze it, otherwise it goes bad. So the big problem there is it functions completely different to normal flour. Like baking bread it took me almost 4 months to figure out how to bake bread with this flour because the gluten development is weird. It's different. Everything changes. So I don't know how this is going to come out or if it's even going to work. I might just be making mush. So we'll see but I'm looking forward to it because it's a lot healthier and it makes you feel a lot better. So yeah, please wish me luck. This is gonna be an interesting one. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I love all of you. Why do you mullet yourself, Ridge Walker? So, when I eat normal flour, the normal white bread or white flour that you buy, I get very bloated and I feel incredibly uncomfortable. And one of the things that actually happened, very interestingly, for years, probably more than a decade, I had this problem where I had to drink a water tablet every day of my life because if I didn't, my fingers would swell up, right? So I would have these swollen fingers and I would actually get like puffy. My feet would swell up. And my dad just told me this is just something that we have in our family, right? It happens to him, but not as bad as it happened to me. But he has a similar thing. And, it's just natural. It's what happens. And then I discovered this flour. And the problem is that on the water tablet, After about a month on this flour, because of the bloatedness of the original flour, the normal flour that you would use, I went to this flour because someone in my church told me they switched to this flour and they've been feeling great because they actually they suffer from gluten intolerance, and this flour actually fixed it. They can eat bread, even though they are diagnosed with what's it called? The gluten allergy. They're diagnosed with it, where you physically can't eat gluten. I'm completely spacing on the name now. Anyway, they were diagnosed with this, so they can't eat bread, but they can eat this bread. If it's made with this flour, they can eat it. There's literally nothing happens to them. And so I started using the flour. Celiac disease, yes, they were diagnosed with celiac disease, but they can eat bread made with this flour. They can eat no other bread, but this flour is fine. They can eat it. And so I started using this flour. It took away the bloatedness almost immediately. But then an interesting thing started to happen. I started to get insane cramps, and the water tablet was actually tanking my blood pressure to the point where my blood pressure was like dangerously low because I no longer needed the water tablet. So it fixed my pretty much all of my problems, and you lose weight. I mean, you're eating bread and still you lose weight. Don't know how that works, but it does. So, it's good. Afrikaans and Afrikaners is the biggest hurdle before they start getting rid of Christianity altogether. Communism and Christianity is directly opposed. Speakeasy, I agree with you, right? And I do think the ultimate goal is to... It's not even that the goal is for them to remove Afrikaners or that the goal is to remove Christianity. The goal is to remove obstacles. So if you are an Afrikaner like Kim Heller or like Pieter Kriel, that's fine, right? Or Karl Neus, because you've bent the knee, you've submitted to the ANC, you can stay. Their biggest issue is the Afrikaner that will not accept communism. And it's going to be the same for religion. If you're a Christian or a Christian that supports communism, you can stay. If you're a Christian that supports Christ, you're going to go. Because I do think the end goal is to make South Africa a communist nation. Ik ben geslaap, so moenie na my luister vandag nie. CR, you can go back to sleep soon. Okay, but ladies and gentlemen, I really do have to go because I still have to go to the shops, and then I have to bake the banana bread, and then I have to do a bunch of work because I have to edit these videos. I will be back tomorrow with another episode. If any changes happen in the Middle East, I will have that for you tomorrow. If nothing changes, we have another show planned tomorrow where we're going to be talking about South Africa and the state of South Africa and all the rest of it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with me, for spending your time with me. I hope you had fun. Thank you so much to everyone that donated. Thank you so much to everyone that supported the channel. And I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.